Good morning, all. I hope you're all well. The weather's obviously getting worse, and once again, COVID is doing more than just its round. So, as always, please stay safe out there. This week, we're going to look at training, but not just focus on the bog standard training, but look at why training in 2022 is going to be key for growth, retention, development, and attraction. According to the City and Guilds, the annual skill index of 2021, 30% of the UK workers say they have not received formal workplace training in the last 5 years. Wow. And for those who've never gotten any training, that's 11% of the whole UK market never receives any training. The good news, though, is according to the LinkedIn Workplace Report 2021, 63% of all L&D professionals agree that L&D should have a seat at the executive table, and companies are not only the ones who value training, 74% of all employees say that they would stay at a company longer if there is investment in their learning and their development. The obstacle to L&D in 2020, according to the, if I could say the word, Udemy 2000 Workplace Trends, said that 61% of all respondents said that they lack time to actually train people. Over 22 million UK workers do not feel that they are equipped with the skills that they need to unlock the new potential in the next 5 years. And that's according to the City and Guilds Annual Skills Index in 2021. And the data gathered by LinkedIn in their Workplace Report 2020 show that leadership and management is the highest priority skills for 57% of the marketplace. So we're looking to say there's lots and lots of things going on there. Even the CIPD organization said that employing social learning to learn how to use social media is becoming more and more the norm. In fact, in 2020, it was 19% of the L&D budget, and in 2021, it was 28% of the budget. But recruitment, we tend to lag behind the open marketplaces, and we pretend to think that teaching by osmosis is the best way to teach our staff. However, research has told us that that is not the quite right way of doing it. When I was researching the topic, I came across a quote by Bruce Lee, which I thought was absolutely, at this time of year, to the point. And the quote said, instead of buying your children all the things you never had, instead teach them all the things you were never taught. And I thought that from a recruitment leader is a great sort of analogy of looking what we should be teaching and how we should be teaching. Today, I'm joined by Paul. I've got man flu Jacobs.
That's me.
He's really probably got the man flu. And Heather, I wish I was still on the beach. Solway has arrived back in the UK and arrived just in the nick of time for the webinar today. Mr. Sharp and Mr. Pye are somewhere in the smoke. So let's kick off with our first question. We know training is important. Why do you think most recruitment agencies think that training by osmosis is acceptable?
Oh, I think that's for you. Kick it off, Heather. Go on and I'll join in.
Oh, thanks, Paul.
Welcome back. Welcome back.
Come on, get your finger out. You've had 2 weeks off. Now start working.
Right, okay. Take myself off the beach, back into training. Let me think about it. It is interesting, isn't it? I think because many people in recruitment learn themselves by osmosis. So, there are a lot of people who have not been on the receiving end of really good training. And so they just sometimes assume that that's just the way it happens. And, I've had really, really talented recruiters in the past, and you quiz them on it and you say, okay, so how is your trainee going to find out what to do? Well, they're just going to sit next to me, and it really is that they're just going to absorb it from me because I'm so amazing. And that's just not the way the world is it? It's not the way in which we learn, and particularly where we're working remotely now some of the time, you cannot rely on learning by osmosis because we're not there to absorb the learning, short of having us all spending all day on a Teams call with all of us like this. You can't rely on people to just pick things up. It's such an inefficient way of passing passing skills on to other people, which is my start of a 10. Paul, over to you while I get my head properly in the game.
You know, it's I've discovered through having the man flu over the last week that a real aid, because I think we know this, but you dehydrate if you drink alcohol, which is great because it dries up your runny nose. So I discovered that whiskey over the weekend was a fantastic method of decongesting myself. Absolutely brilliant. So I'm
not sure what that's got to do with training, Paul.
Nothing.
But,
also,
nothing.
I'm passing on a very well learned lesson. So I think
you keep telling yourself that, Mr.
Heather,
Jacobs,
so
you keep telling
alcohol,
yourself
even
that.
at this time of the morning, may be the aid you're looking for. I mean, you make a great point. Of course, with people working from home and I think likely to stay in that situation, at least on that sort of flexi solution method that people are now adopting, training new people particularly is extremely difficult. And I think we're fortunate that we live in an age where we can use this kind of medium, and obviously it helps a great deal, but it's no substitute really for face-to-face meetings and training and coaching sessions. And osmosis, as Howard interestingly puts it, is simply not going to happen in that sense. It is a challenge. If people are working from, it was a particular challenge during the lockdown, training new people. You have to find a whole range of creative ways of being able to provide training and coaching to people. One part of which I think, and I know you'd agree with this, Heather, and Howard as well, is that the old days of sticking people in a classroom and then basically talking at them for days or a week, hoping at the end of that period that they'd remember everything or most of what you told them. We know that doesn't work. And I think you're looking at bite-sized training sessions, 1 hour, 45-minute sessions, 2-hour sessions maximum, which gives people the opportunity to assimilate the information and remember most of it, is probably the way forward. So to some extent, video can work. But then there's large chunks of the day when they're not, as you say, listening and learning from people just doing the job around them. So I think it is a challenge, and we'll perhaps come back to that shortly. I think, and let's be reasonable here, and I think everyone listening will understand this very clearly, especially at the moment. We are, as an industry, thankfully drowning in roles. I mean, I say thankfully, it's obviously great news that the industry has bounced back so brilliantly over the last 12 months. But it does place tremendous pressure on managers, leaders, because they're under the cosh to try to fill those roles, as many as they can, take care of candidates and so forth. So I think I have great sympathy for people when it comes to their time management. We know it's extremely difficult to keep all of those plates spinning at the same time, but it's a question of priorities. And whilst we know that obviously we want to fill roles, we want to help candidates, that's what we're in business to do, we are, I think, at the center of everything has to be this passion and this focus on supporting and developing our people. And I think Howard made a couple of very good points about stats around learning and development. We know for a fact, and every one of the people listening to this who have interviewed thousands, tens of thousands of candidates over the years will know this to be the truth, that people leave jobs because they feel undervalued, that they don't feel they're being developed, that they've hit their heads on ceilings and so forth. Money is in there, but it's never the number one, or very rarely the number one driver for people changing jobs. If we can't accept that as a truth, which it is, and acknowledge that and recognize that if we're going to attract and retain retain staff, our colleagues, we have to, as a priority, dedicate time every day to looking after and developing our people. And we talk about inductees, but of course, we've also got to look at experienced existing people. How are we going to develop those people? Succession planning, moving people up the ladder.
Just to hold you there, Paul, because you seem to be answering question 1, 3, 5, 6, 8, and 9 all at the same time.
You can't. A leopard doesn't change its spots.
Come on, give me a break.
But if we get back to question 1, and this is what we're saying, and go back to question 1, which was why do you think it's not acceptable? In a very roundabout way of hoping osmosis works on all of the answers that you've given, and you get back to that initial answer.
Osmosis means.
So I think the reason why recruitment agencies train in that way is A, because they've not got the material. Most recruitment agencies do not have a good set of material for that. they live in the belief that what was good enough for them is good enough for others, and therefore that learning by osmosis, sit by the side of me and just absorb what I've learned is what they do.
Yeah.
And I think some of them actually don't see the importance of that. And I think your comment about the old style of learning, of putting people on 5-day, 6-day, 2-week, induction courses, although they will learn an awful lot on those courses, it's the retention of that learning that's more important. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on in the questions that we're going to ask. But I think we've got to look at how modern people learn. And there's a very big difference from sort of my age group, where you learn by someone telling you, you read something, etc. Lots of people, look at my son who's just done, a couple of years ago did his A levels, didn't read a book, didn't read the notes, did it all from video. Everything was done off video. And when I spoke to his friends, etc., all of them were almost exactly the same. Some read, but a lot of they picked it up off video and was watching video. So the power of, or the change in the way people learn is happening more and more. So we've got to start to think, if we're going to train our people and retain our people, we've got to address the way we train them. So we start to look at training new starters to perform. And the first thing we need to look at is, how do we achieve break even quickly? How would you lay out then the first 6 weeks of a new person coming into the business, irrespective whether that person has got recruitment skills or not? What would you do in that first 6 weeks of them being in the business to help them get to their break-even point quickly?
Well, I think if I could just pick this up quickly. So I've been working with quite a number of clients on this very point of late, and in the early weeks, when you sit back and you think about what is it that we want the new people to do, I think it almost inevitably comes back to talking to candidates. If they haven't had experience, it's pretty risky to ask them to speak directly to clients, and they themselves will probably run away from that because they don't feel comfortable or confident at this point. Understandably, they haven't been taught anything yet. The way to learn your particular sector, the way to understand what's going on in your particular area of recruitment, is ultimately to talk to an awful lot of candidates, I beg your pardon, a lot of candidates, because it's the talking to the job seekers or people occupying those roles is going to give you a very strong education. You're going to learn very quickly what their roles are, what the acronyms mean, their job titles and so forth. And it's going to start to build your confidence. Keep in mind, of course, that candidates and clients are in fact the same human beings. They just switch from one role to another. So gaining experience talking to candidates in the early stages is, I think, a very good way to start. Therefore, when you start to think about what sort of training you're going to give to people in their first 6 weeks, I think a lot of it is going to be candidate centric. So it's going to be looking at interviewing skills. It's going to be looking at qualifying candidates. It's going to be talking about writing, and you come back to this perhaps later, how to write effective copy or effective profiles, how to look at CVs, identify people, looking at Boolean string searches, just about anything. There's a long list that's related to candidates, because you want your new people to be gaining experience and knowledge and building their confidence through developing their skill sets around that whole area of resourcing. And frankly, also, if you're looking at break even, to your point, Howard, here, the quickest way I think people can be productive is, of course, to be finding candidates who are more experienced colleagues can then arrange interviews for, can take to market. Therefore, because we are so short on good quality candidates in the industry at the moment.
Yeah, Paul, I couldn't agree more, and particularly with what you're saying about building confidence. There is a huge segment of people coming into recruitment now who aren't used to talking to people on the phone, and we know that that's the most effective way to engage with people, is to talk to them on the phone. And if we don't get them on the phone early, and build their confidence and their ability to have those conversations and to relate to people, if we haven't hired on that skill in the first place, you've got to get them, and they need to be enjoying themselves early doors as well. It can be a big shock to somebody coming out of education and into the workplace, which some of our trainees, this will be their first job. they want to be having fun, they want to be enjoying their job, and we need to be remembering in that training, in that first 6 weeks, that we're focusing on why they're doing it. So the why is just as important as the what. So, understanding why we're getting them on the phone ringing candidates, understanding why we're doing that, and what value they're adding to the business and to the candidates. So I think that confidence, that motivation, that enjoyment, that's all really important, as well as I know there absolutely is a whole string of technical things that they need to learn, and technical skills, but in the context of they've got to be having fun, they've got to be building confidence, they've got to be enjoying themselves, they've got to feel supported, because it's a scary old world, isn't it, the first time they get out there on the phone.
I think that confidence thing is really important. I think if I went back to my computer people days, we were saying when we're training people, if the person makes a placement in the first 3 months, they've done really, really well. Well, can you imagine that first 3 months, what that must feel like, the amount of failure that they must go through to get to that one placement? No wonder there's such a big attrition rate in that first 3 to 6 months of people starting the recruitment business. And I think a lot of that is because we do, depending on how you do that, let's say you've got training in place, you give that week, 2-day, whatever it be, training session, and then you think that they're expert and just let them loose and off they go. Where I think what Paul was saying, trying to answer question 1, if you break your training down into bite-sized chunks of what is needed immediately and what will bring them instant success, irrespective whether they're new recruits or whether they're existing recruits, then that has to be in that candidate marketplace. And if you start to think, if I'm an experienced recruiter or a new recruiter and I walk into a business and I'm sat there the first day and I've sort of gone through basic training on how to find candidates and they've taught me what they need to do, and then I'm saying, right, give me the easiest jobs that you've got, even though you're working them, let me work them alongside you. Irrespective whether I'm an experienced or inexperienced recruiter, what it starts to give me is that ability to find candidates and help other people. And hopefully within a certain period of time, those candidates will be getting interviews and getting placements. Therefore, I'm getting more engagement and I'm feeling more part of the business. And I always think that training should be, we train, we then mirror, we match, then we review it, and then we regurgitate it. And so what we should be thinking about in that training every week is in those little bite-sized chunks, what is it they need to learn that week? Train them on it, get them to mirror people, get them to match what they're doing, then review it, and then get them to regurgitate that back to you as a presentation of some description, so you can understand how much of that knowledge that they've absorbed and how much that knowledge that they understand. Because sometimes, even when you train, mirror, and match, they might not understand why they're doing it. And therefore, that review and regurgitation of that knowledge is really important to view that. And I think that's a difference between what managers do when they go, what have you learned? Rather than how have you achieved this week? How did you achieve that? And turning that what culture into a how culture becomes very important.
Yeah. Howard, can I just pick up on a point that you've just made? And I think what's really important is whatever you're training people to do, they then do. There's no point in teaching somebody something in week 4 and they don't get round to doing whatever it is you've taught them in week 4 until week 12, because when week 12 comes along, they don't remember anything that they were taught in week 4. So when you're training people, not only do they need, and you're right, to regurgitate what repeat back what they've said, what you've said, but also then to do it, and you've got to do it immediately. It's like learning to drive a car. If you teach me how to move through the gears, but I'm not going to be doing that for 8 weeks, well, there's no point in teaching me in week 1. So basically get them to do what it is and build those skill sets layer on layer on layer on layer on. So for example, if we're going to get into more advanced things around business development, dealing with clients, overcoming objections and so forth, they've got to be in a place, mentally in a place, where they feel comfortable doing those things. There's not much point in teaching them to do those things in the first few weeks, because they're simply not going to be executing those tasks anytime soon. But I think getting it in order is important.
Yeah, and I think you're right there. It is layer on layer on layer on layer. And it's, build the basics, build the basics, build the basics, get more advanced as you go, rather than have it all in one big hit and then set them loose and hope they remember everything from there.
Well, they won't.
Yeah, so if we look at that, then we've talked a lot about new colleagues and we've tried to bring in existing colleagues. If we think retention is the new recruitment, what do you think we should be training our existing staff on to help the retention of them and help the development of the business?
Shall I go first on that one?
Go first.
Go for
Go
it,
first
Heather.
on that one. So I think for me that falls into two separate camps. So one is your good, solid recruitment staff who are doing a good job. What we can't do is leave them like mushrooms in the dark to just get on with it. So, you know, in the past, I've run good to great programs where we're saying, okay, you're good at this, you're clearly good, you're earning plenty of money, you're hitting your targets, but actually everybody can be better. And it's great actually to go back with those people and revisit some of the skills and some of the things they've forgotten, or just remind them of, or teach them new things, or, you know, so there's some really interesting stuff you can do related to their current job to make them the best that they can be in their current job. And it is that retention piece, Howard. It's absolutely about showing people that you're invested in their success, that you're not just leaving them like mushrooms in the dark to get on with it, but you're invested actively in them being successful. And then the second part of it for me is about giving them the skills to progress their career. It's remembering that different people in your organization will have different ambitions. So while we keyed into what they are, is it to become more of a consultant, to become an account manager, an account director, to be more, you know, leading client relationships, or is it to develop as a manager? Is it because you want to grow your team, you want to be better at leading and motivating other people? And that's a whole different skill set. And that opens up a whole host of training interventions that you can put in place to support the long-term career development of your staff. And again, that's about retaining them. It's showing people that you're interested in their long-term development, their long-term ambition, and whether it is classroom-based management development training, or it's sponsoring them to do MBAs or mini MBAs, or, you know, there's some great apprenticeships in leadership. There are a whole host of ways in which you can be investing for the long-term future of retaining your staff.
I think you make some brilliant points there, Heather, and I think it's absolutely critical to demonstrate, not just to say it, but demonstrate that you're prepared to invest in your people long term. You know, one of the problems I think in many SME businesses particularly is that not a great deal of time and energy is placed into succession planning. And that's not being critical, it's just to state the fact. And as this osmosis thing kind of kicks in again, that you find people that are sort of getting close to the top of a business have often got there through their own instincts and their own ability without necessarily receiving additional training and development to enable them to get there. And for those of us that have reached very senior roles, very often when we've hit that sort of high spot in our careers, we've realized only too quickly that actually we're completely ill prepared for that opportunity. And we learn as we go, which isn't a great way to be running a business. And I found myself in that position many years ago when I became the MD of Office Angels, that I'd limited, if no real development to enable me to do that job at that point. And it was a struggle initially. It took a little while for me to find my feet and take control. And that's not great. And I think that's not an unusual experience for lots of us. So I think it's extremely important to do that. Interestingly, the modern attitude now, and when we talk about benefits, and I know we've had those conversations of late, is to look at what sort of development and training people want, not only for their own professional career, but outside of work. When you consider that, you know, work isn't everything. If we're looking at retention, then you've also got to consider from a holistic perspective what it is that individual wants. So if that individual wants to learn to climb Mount Everest or wants to sail around the world, and whatever it is, and I'm making ridiculous statements, although perhaps not that ridiculous, then maybe there's a thought that maybe we invest in helping them outside of work as well. Because if the idea is, and rightly so, that we completely want that individual to be a part of our business for the next 10, 20, 50 years, then yes, we should be very interested in helping them to develop as a human being as well as an individual within our businesses. So I think it's kind of a deeper subject in many respects.
And I think on the deeper subject, I think, yeah, not to talk over there, Heather.
No,
I think it's a deeper subject. I think what we're talking about is we have ideas of what we should be training on, and Heather articulates them very well there. And it's obvious advanced recruitment techniques,
She's your favourite,
training and stuff like that. Well, you just ramble on, Paul. So yeah, you're from there.
Just favourite.
So what I was going to say, though, this comes back to a little earlier point, though, that we should be thinking about, you know, when people come into the business, what is their career path? What is their career strategy? What is their growth strategy? So when we start to look at that individual sort of growth into the next market, the next role, what training and development is actually attached to that? And, it's interesting that Simon Johnson's put there on about habit and knowledge, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But certainly what we've got to start to think about is the advancement of their own personal skill set, their business skill set, that enhances them and again then ties them back to that business. And it's introducing things to them at an early stage. And I think what you're saying there, Paul, is right. Both of us, when we went into those directorship type of roles, were probably ill-equipped to be in those directorship roles, and we had to learn very, very quickly. So I think that coaching and development of the person to go into that role is really important, and you do that early. So if you spot someone who's got management skill set early, introduce them to management, introduce them to training into management, because you then start to see the advancement of their capabilities, and they start to see that you are interested in them as a person, not just as a billing machine, and that you're going to help them develop their personal skill set to move them further on, either in the company or outside the company. And I think that's the thing that a lot of people are scared about, of, well, if I give this person all this training and then they leave. But it's worse still if you don't train them and they stay, as there's, I can't remember who said that. But it's,
Richard Branson.
I think it was Richard Branson, but so it's from there. So we've got to start to think about, we've got to identify what their skill sets are, make sure that we have that in their career plan, and then start to train it as they get to the level, before the level, and get there. So if we go back to that Bruce Lee quote, because that really hit home with me. So the pair of you, it's an interesting question. What did you not get trained on that you wish you had been trained on?
Well, I'm going to give you two answers. One is I think a sort of long-term, regardless of the fact I started in the 70s, and one is a modern answer. I think the first one would be mindset. I don't think, I think that you, and had that sort of talked about this earlier, having the right frame of mind. I mean, we give skills training, we give techniques and tips. We put people under other more experienced staff to allow them to be mentored by people that do their roles extremely well. I think there's an awful lot of things we do particularly well, but maybe we don't spend as much time really getting people into a mindset position where they know how to cope with the stresses and the strains of the role. I mean, we are fortunate that we get paid for using our communication skills and our intelligence, our emotional intelligence, our IQ. We know, it's clean work. We're not physically challenged, not very often anyway. Mentally, we are challenged, and I think it's important that if I was going to look at what I would like to have been trained on, I think understanding how I was going to cope from a mindset perspective, a mental health perspective, I think is very important. So I think we need to think hard about that. What are people going to be going through in their first 12, 20 weeks, particularly because we know that that's when people are most affected by starting in new roles, and the times they feel the most level of distress and discomfort happens in those periods. So I think we ought to be thinking about that. The second thing I would say, especially today, is that to be a great recruitment consultant, you also have to learn to be a great marketeer. Now, back in my day, of course, that meant just learning how to write copy for adverts. But these days, of course, social media is such a massive thing in our industry, and learning how to be a wizard on LinkedIn or any of the other social media platforms is an essential, I think. And I don't think that we put necessarily as much time and energy into training people to learn how to develop their own brand, as it were, their own personal brand, and how they network, because I think those things, particularly in the candidate short market, are critically important.
Thanks, Mr. Jacobs. I struggled with this question, really struggled with this question, because I've been so fortunate in my career to work in organisations that provided great development. And so I do feel that I I was given the opportunity to learn all of the things that I needed to learn. So, you know, strictly in order to answer your question, Howard, because I know you don't like it if we don't answer your questions, I wish I'd learned a language, right? It's nothing to do with the question, but it's the only thing I feel was missing in my life. I would love to have been fluent
Heather,
in another language.
Heather, you speak English and rubbish. You've got 2 languages. I don't understand that.
Like I say, I wish I'd learned to speak English, full stop.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. But just to take on what you said, Paul, so it's a slight twist on the question. You know, I don't feel I was missing anything in what I was taught. I think I got taught some amazing things. If I was to pick one thing that was the most important thing that I learned, that I've tried to pass on to other people, and particularly my kids, actually, because I learned it from my mother, and I think we should teach our trainees this, is it's okay to get things wrong.
Yes,
it's okay to fail.
Yes.
And not to be frightened of it, not to feel anxious that you're not perfect all the time. And that really important thing is to learn from the things you don't get right first time, and to just persistently keep trying until you do get it right.
Yes,
and that
true.
resilience and mental ability to fail well is the one thing I think we must not fail to teach the people around us.
I think when I wrote the question, I wrote it flippantly, as I write most of my questions.
Oh no, see, that was the mistake. I took you seriously.
And then realised I got to answer the question as well, which was the second part of it. Because like you, I felt, the obvious things of, better recruitment skills and etc. But when I started to look at the things where I had been trained really well, and I went back to my sporting life and said, right, okay, as a ex-pro sport person, what did we do? And what I sort of boiled it down to is we created great habits. We created absolutely brilliant habits. And those habits were all about the creating of a cue, what starts the habit, the routine, and then what is the reward. And if I start to look back at my recruitment lifestyle, in those early days, I didn't have great habits. What I had to do is work really hard to find those habits so I could be successful. And part of that is failing, and part of that is doing the right thing. Part of that is time management, prioritizing your workloads and things like that. But if I boiled it back down to it, it all came down to habits and creating really good habits. And I could watch people come to work and start to realize, you start at 9 o'clock and they're rocking in at 1 minute past 9. That's a bad habit. You finish at 5:30, they're out the door at, 5:30.01, that's not a great habit, and so it was about creating better habits and better routines to ensure that I would succeed constantly. And that's what I thought, that from a training point of view, you can train people how to recruit, etc. But then what training should be the start of is the build of the habits and how those habits works. So next week we're actually going to discuss habits quite a lot, about creating the right behaviors and habits. But for training, what would they be? When you start to say, I want to train behaviors, we talk about putting, commission plans in place to create the right behaviors. But what should we be training that create the right behaviors that lead and become habit?
This is quite a deep question, because people will assimilate the culture and the behaviors of those around them, particularly from the top, if I can use that expression. So I think you've got to start by asking yourself, what behaviors are we demonstrating in the business? What are people going to soak up when they come and work with us? Starts really with analysing the behaviors and values of your existing culture, because one would hope that, leading by example, others very quickly will understand what those right behaviors and attitudes are in the business. I think that's a very important thing. You cannot expect people to behave in a certain way if you're not exhibiting those behaviors and attitudes yourself. So I think it starts there for sure. But I think that, Heather made a number of very good points around this. One of them, I think, and I couldn't agree more with Heather on this point, is that, we should be encouraging people to be courageous, if I can use that word, to make mistakes. There's nothing wrong with that. Besides which, they'll never make a mistake that was half as bad as any that we've made. Gosh, if I was to list some of the bloomers I've made over the years, it would make your hair curl. So I think be prepared to make mistakes, because that is the way in which we learn as children. It's, if you look at kids and how they learn, how we learn as children, you made mistakes, you fell over, you grazed your knees, you got up again, and so on and so forth. And yet, as we become adults, we develop a whole range of neuroses that frighten us. We're frightened to make mistakes. We're scared of the pain that the mistakes will cause us, without recognizing that the way we grow is to actually endure those occasional injuries, because it's those things that enable us to grow very quickly. So if you have a culture that is scornful of people who make mistakes, you're really not going to let people develop, and they in turn, I think, will ultimately leave you. You've got to have that open environment where people are encouraged to try, and when they try, they will make mistakes. And who are we to sit in judgment, because we constantly make mistakes ourselves? And being able to do that and give people the courage to do those things, I think is vitally important. And you make a great point, Howard. It's with many things, sports a very good example. A lot of it is muscle memory. You do things over and over and over and over and over and over and over, so your body and your mind are in sync. Things come naturally without you having to think too hard about it. It applies to all sorts of professions as well. And I think that we have to do that. It's rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat. Keep going, keep going, keep going until you get it. And I think those things are very important in terms of behaviours and training.
I couldn't agree more. And for me, in the training context, it comes down to coaching behaviours. So mentoring and coaching. So we're needing to make sure that everybody in the organisation is encouraging people to work things out for themselves, not always just to be fed information and fed knowledge, but to actually take responsibility for their own learning, to own their own progress. And so I think for me, getting that coaching culture and that coaching questioning way of managing people will get the right behaviours and habits in your organisation and will create a learning culture.
So I think it's there. And I think what, Paul, you're saying, then if I go back to that, my sporting analogy, my sporting analogy wasn't about the muscle memory and getting, repeating things over and over again to get the muscle memory right. It was about creating cues that would create the right habit in the first place.
Yeah, I understand.
And it was interesting when I went from a reasonably good rugby club to a Premiership club and started to play at the Premiership level. And on a Tuesday, we were told, as you're driving back home, start to play a game in your head. Start to play the game you're going to play on Saturday in your head. On Thursday, driving home, play it again in your head. Saturday morning, make sure you wake up at the same time, because what you're doing is you're creating cues constantly that build you into the game. And that became a routine. And what you started to see was the rewards. And it was quite often that I'd have visualized a game on Thursday in my head, driving back from Manchester to Leeds. And then on Saturday, some of those things that I visualized actually happened. You could see that, and you could suddenly accelerate into certain things, and those things happened, and you could start to see the rewards of what was actually happening out there. And to me, when we start to talk about training and behavior in recruitment and putting the right behaviors in place, if we're going to train people, then what we've got to do is start to create the triggers of when that training becomes actually habit and starts to work. And that, to me, is the bit that we've got to get right, that we can train and train and train and train. But if we don't train the right behaviors and then create a habit from it, then that training is not going to have the maximum impact that it should have. And so I was speaking to clients all this week about certain parts of it. And I said the best way to think about this is why does, when the email comes, or why when your phone gets a text, does it chime and make a bing? That's the cue. And that cue instantly hits your brain. And I'm pretty certain, as Paul's now probably looking at a text now that he's probably just got from a client, that buzz or vibration is the cue to say, actually, there's something there that's come to you. And so the routine is instantly you open it up and have a look. And therefore, your reward is whether it's something that you want to get rid of, something you want to act on, etc., etc., etc. So even in our modern day life, we are creating routine and creating habits and being forced to follow a habit that we didn't even know we had, because that's a habit. Once that chime goes off, the habit or the buzz goes off, the habit is there. And it's worse still when you put it in your pocket and you're sort of walking somewhere and you can't find it, buzz, oh, who's called me, who's doing this, who's doing that? Because that's what it does. It's the routine and the reward from there. So I think we've got to start to create the right habits from the behaviors that we're training to make sure that we maximize our sale on those type of things.
Yeah.
Before I ask the next question, last week, you remember, Paul, that Dave challenged me because we put a quote from Lil Wayne up to say, can you find a quote from Travis Scott on training? Well, there you go. There's a quote from Travis Scott on training. I've no idea who Travis Scott is or what he sings, by the way. So there you go. So the question is then, anyway, okay, how do we then achieve our maximum return on training?
Look, I mean, the ultimate.
I love this question.
Go on, Heather, you go first.
So I think there are times when training is something that's done to people because somebody decides in the organization arbitrarily that it needs to be done to them. And I think you have to involve people in their training. It's about how you set the whole thing up. So it depends on what training we're talking about, but I can think of a leadership program that I was involved in. It was a very long, big investment in this leadership program, went on over a long period of time and produced some amazing leaders for this organization. But we deliberately set it up with an application process at the beginning. So people had to actually apply to go on the program, and they felt they earned a place on it rather than their manager nominating for them, or they're just sticking their hand up and saying they wanted it. And that act of applying for it and going through a process to earn a place on it meant they took the whole thing more seriously, and they engaged with it because they'd had to fight to win a place on it. And that's quite a small change in that it didn't change the learning itself, but it just put some process around it about how people engaged with it. And then as part of the program running, we had, it wasn't just sitting modules with groups of people, but there was action learning in between it. So there was a project that ran all the way through the program. There were presentations at the end of it. There were, the whole structure of it. So it isn't just about, although obviously the intervention on the day or in the hour or whatever it is really, really important. But what you put around it really means something. So, not allowing people to just drop out of training because there's another priority, because we think this is important and therefore you must prioritize it, and putting time aside to do it properly. And sometimes it's about it is about how people talk about training so that it's valued in the organization. That to me makes a huge difference, because people are far more likely to engage with it and get something out of it because they're bought into it right from the beginning.
Completely agree. I think it's a brilliant answer, Heather. And I suppose the ultimate measurement for investing in training is to look at your staff retention and your lack, hopefully, of attrition. So if you're looking at metrics, clearly there'll be a direct link, I believe, between learning and development and your attrition rate. And I think you make a great point that where you're looking at training and coaching, it's relevant to the individual. It's part of what they want to achieve in their lives, rather than being press ganged into something that they're not particularly keen on.
I think we mentioned that before, didn't we? And some of the participants in the chat have agreed with us. The why is really important. Absolutely
right. So, I think there's an interesting point here, and I think there is a direct line between the amount of effort and energy we invest in our people by way of development and training. And that's this L&D acronym is a very small couple of letters, but it's actually quite a deep subject. And the amount we invest in people has a direct impact on our profitability and our turnover. And there's no doubt whatsoever, and I know we can all speak about a lot of our clients, if not all of our clients, that the clients that are doing extremely well at the moment are all organizations that at the heart of everything they do are the welfare of their people. They recognize that looking after their people in every sense, particularly around areas around L&D, will make an enormous difference to their growth and development as a business and their ultimate profitability. And those things are absolutely inextricably linked. You cannot develop your business and expect to take it where you'd like it to go without recognizing at the heart of everything is the welfare of your people. You look after your people, they will look after you. And that is very much a part of this whole L&D experience. It's about lifelong learning, not just bringing people into the business and giving them some induction training.
I think, what Heather was saying there about, the application. I've just finished a a training course, management training course with a client where we did 5 full day sessions, but over 3 months. So it's nice, spread out, learn a bit, implement it, work out what's going on. And originally we had 5 people on the course, and the owner of the business said, I've got another 3 or 4 people that I think could really benefit from the course. And I said, go way out and ask them whether they want to come on the course or not. Don't force them, ask them where they want. We ended up with about 8, 9 people on the course in the end. And then we brought in 2 people who said, I'm unsure why I'm on this course. I want to learn whether or not I want to manage or not. So it wasn't about being taught how to manage. They wanted to learn what management was about and whether it would fit their skill set and whether they want. We had one that said afterwards, absolutely, I don't think it's right for me. And one that said, actually, I want to do more because I want to understand how I can affect people in a very different way. And I think what you're both saying there, it's about that engagement with your staff, that they see their personal development, which will then hit your retention button, it will hit your training and development button, it will hit your loyalty card massively, where people become more loyal to your business. And obviously then it's about then what they produce for your business over a long period of time. And we all know that, you know, if you lose a recruiter that's been with your business 3, 4, 5 years, you know, replacing that person, even if they're only billing 150k, replacing that person is probably going to take 2 years to get to someone to that level to bill 150k. So it's a very long time. And we've got to start to think about the return on investment is all about retention and development of the people that you've got. So we're running out of time. I do have a question, which I think I'm going to bump into next week because I think it fits brilliantly with next week. Next week, we're going to talk an awful lot about behaviors and habits and how to drive the right behaviors and create the right habits within the business. So next week, we're going to talk about that type of thing. The question I had at the end was about the cancel culture, that managers often complain that they don't have time. So subliminally telling their staff they really don't care about the staff, you're not important as I am, etc. My work's far more important, and therefore they cancel the training. So what we're going to talk about is how we can create behaviors and habits within the culture that maybe will stop that type of thing. So training becomes a more regular, prescriptive thing which people actually enjoy and engage with. Yeah. So, ladies and gents, thanks very much for your time. It's again, it's a 45-minute session that goes really, really quickly. Heather, Paul, thank you very much. Welcome back to the country. Paul, get well soon. Ladies and gents, enjoy the rest of your week. We look forward to it. And again, if anyone wants to have any more rappers, quotes, please don't quote me. Please don't send any emails to me because I don't know any more from here. Here we go. Ladies and gents, thanks for your time. It's been much appreciated. Catch you all next week.